The meeting is now live and is being broadcast and recorded. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. Please can I remind everyone this meeting is being broadcast and recorded. If there are any technical issues, please bear with us. Agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Mackenzie Ball has given her apologies today.
And do we have any other apologies? Please raise your hand and I will come to you in turn. Giving apologies for anybody else? No. Can I ask the officer to confirm the attendance of any commissioner joining the meeting remotely?
Thank you, Chair. I can see online Councillor Dorothy Hayes is in attendance. And
Present.
Councillor McLean.
Present.
That's all, Chair. I can do a roll call if you wish, Chair. Yep. When I call your name, please can you confirm you are present? Councillor Pickering.
Present.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor Watts. Councillor Webb. Present. Councillor Welch. Present. Councillor Barnard.
Present.
Councillor Eberly.
Present.
Councillor Forster.
Present.
Councillor Haffergy.
Present.
And sorry, I think I missed Victoria Hill online. Can I just check if Victoria Hill?
Yes, present.
Lovely, thank you, Victoria. Have I missed you out? Sorry, Caroline. Can I just say, yes, I haven't got you down, sorry. Councillor Augustin, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Agenda item 2 is to recommend for approval as a correct record the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting held on the 16th of August 2023. Does anyone have an issue with the accuracy of the minutes? Vice Chair, has anyone joining remotely indicated there's an issue?
No, they haven't.
So I move the acceptance of the minutes. Councillor Welsh, are you happy to second the minutes as a correct record?
Yes, Chair. I second them as correct record.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Those are agreed. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. The full text of declarations of interest is set out on the agenda papers at item 3. Does any councillor have a disclosable pecuniary interest or an affected interest to declare? Please also declare the nature of the interest. Councillor Eberly.
I'm employed for a company who undertakes from time to time work for Thames Water, and I might be employed in such projects myself.
Thank you. Please declare if anyone is working under a party whip. Vice Chair, has anyone joining remotely indicated that they have anything to declare?
No, they haven't.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, which is urgent items of business, and agenda item 5, public participation.
I can confirm, Chair, there have been no urgent items of business or public participation notified to me.
Right. Agenda item number 6, the Council Plan Overview Report, which might be referred to as the CPOR. Deputy Chief Executive Stuart McKellar, would you like to do a brief introduction to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Very happy to. Before I do that, can I just say that I do have colleagues joining me online this evening if members do wish to ask some detailed questions around individual services. So Damien James is representing the Delivery Directorate, Max Baker for Place Planning Regeneration, and we have Abby Thomas for the Chief Executive's Office, and although I can't see her on the screen, I believe that Gráinne Siggins, the Executive Director for People, is also online. So the report in front of you this evening, Chair, is the summary of the performance of the Council for the first quarter of the current financial year. It's always a bit strange to get the first quarter report when we're now just in the third quarter, but this is probably about the quickest we've ever managed to get it through the member arena. So it's also the first opportunities where the Overview and Scrutiny Commission have been given the chance to look at the report before it goes in front of the executive. So anything that you draw from it this evening, you have the opportunity to feed on to the executive, which will look at the report in 2-3 weeks' time when it does so as part of the normal cycle. So there are a huge amount of information in the report. It's drawn from the individual quarterly service reports prepared by each directorate, and that sets out performance against their service plans, which are agreed each year, and they reflect in the main the priorities of the council as set out in the council plan. So we are in a position where at this moment in time we are working on a new council plan following the elections in May this year. So what we will do is follow the current format and priorities in the CPR for the remainder of this current financial year, and then when we get into the next financial year we will start to monitor against the new priorities which are set out in the new council plan, which will be agreed probably in November this year. So that's the reason for doing that is that I've always had confusion of changing track mid-year, which means you can always look back year on year on year against the comparative performance. So you will see something different in the next financial year, but not for this year. So I won't go through all of the details of the report, and members have had it, and I know you've had the opportunity to ask quite a number of questions, and some of them have been able to have responses provided before this evening. I'm sure we'll deal with the others as best we can during the course of this evening as well. But just the reminder of probably the biggest event for the council in quarter one was actually the election. I think universally it was acknowledged that the chief executive and their electoral services team did a great job to make that process go as smoothly as it was. Clearly it resulted in a very different council than we had before, and we're all learning how to adapt to a different arrangement, and that process will continue over the coming weeks and months. But you know, that's probably the biggest thing that happened to the council in quarter one. Nationally, I guess we had the King's coronation, but probably feels a bit less important than the local elections here. That also was very well managed in Bracknell Forest. Other key things which happened is that we increased the number of flats which have food waste collection. When the scheme was initially rolled out, there were no flats involved. It was only for houses. That process is gradually continuing, and I think there may be a question about the progress around that this evening, which I'll ask Damien James to deal with if that does come up. And the other thing to celebrate is that we did have a good Ofsted inspection rating for the adult community learning service, and that's always to be celebrated. So that's it, I think, in terms of the highlights. Chair, there are quite a number of issues I'm sure members will wish to pick up on the way through, not least the financial position which is reported. I'm happy to deal with that and give an update on the current position if members ask a question around it.
Thank you very much. We'll open now to questions for the Deputy Chief Executive arising from the report. When you ask your question, it would be helpful if you could refer to the relevant section within the report that you're referring to, and we'll spend about 20 minutes taking factual questions on the report before moving into debate. Councillor Hafty.
Adrian Hafty. Yeah, it's more of a procedural question here. It's in section 3 of the report where we have the RAG status markers. And it's kind of like when we've got the amber status marker, sort of, it can mean various things. It could be that a project's maybe just delayed a bit, or it could be there's an actual sort of some hurdle or something that needs to be overcome to address that. Ideally, I'd guess the comment section of this should actually explain what the problem is or what the issue is. And although some of them do, not all of them do. And I was just wondering, you know, procedurally, is the RAG marker the best way that we go about this? And should they be actually telling us what's going on and what the status is of each of those actions? Thanks.
Yes, we can always learn from the approach. The RAG rating is a pretty standard one. I think it's a fair point. We look at some of the details that some of the descriptions are better than others, and that's something that we can certainly look to improve the consistency of as we go ahead. When it comes to the performance indicators themselves, there is actually a little bit of science behind it, which is within our performance system there are thresholds which we have for, depending on how far away the performance is from the target, then it either becomes amber or red, depending on what those thresholds are that are set. So there is a degree of science, but when you're looking at the activities, it is more a judgment around. Green indicates there's nothing to worry about in this instance. Red is that's something that we are all over, and there's an awful lot in the middle with the amber ones, which we might not be quite on track, but we're not overly concerned. But I think your point is a fair one, that we should be able to explain in a bit more detail why we are a little bit concerned, but not too concerned about those.
So I have a question. The budget overspend of 1.226 million is obviously a standout issue in the report. Is this part of a trend that you've been tracking, and what key measures can be taken to ensure that it doesn't continue on this trajectory?
Okay, well, the budget information in here is inevitably a few months out of date. It's supposed to reflect the position as indicated at the end of Q1. So at that moment in time, it was quite a concerning position, as you say, a predicted overspend of potentially around £1.2 million. I will be taking a report to the executive in October because the position has actually worsened quite significantly since then. So the most recent information that was presented to the corporate management team 2 weeks ago indicated that the latest projected overspend is somewhere between £2.25 and £4 million. The reason why there's a difference in the range is because we ask service areas to predict what they think their outturn position is likely to be by the end of the year, but then also to highlight any emerging issues where there are risks which they are tracking, which if they go against us will have a detrimental impact on the budget position by the end of the year. So we're currently facing that £4 million position. That's the biggest potential overspend that this council has faced. So it's a really, really unusual and challenging position. And why it's such a difficult one is because typically we face pressures on the demand-led services, children's and adult social care. That's quite common. This year we're also seeing pressures on our housing services with their increased numbers of people in homelessness accommodation. And we're also seeing big increases in other pressures, including loss of income. So that's not typically what we see. Normally we see income holding up but spend going the wrong way. This year it's a combination of everything. So planning income is falling through the floor because the economy is not as buoyant as it was. Developers are not bringing through as many schemes. Development control income is affected similarly because there's not as much work going on the ground. So it's a very difficult position that we're in. The corporate management team is monitoring it very closely. We're having weekly updates on the areas where the highest pressures are being reported. We're also introducing a directorate budget review sessions where myself and the chief executive will be sitting down with the management teams to go through all the areas of the budget to understand what is going on and to make sure that work is going on to mitigate some of the pressures that we're facing. Some of them are real and cannot be addressed in the short term, but we need to look at what other measures might be possible to bring us closer to a position where we're balanced. It's not a great deal of consolation, but I should report to members that what we're seeing in Broughton Forest is exactly the same as being faced by all our neighbours in Berkshire. You might well have noticed in the press, West Berkshire Council have just managed to bring their predicted overspend down to under £7 million, and they're not a much bigger organisation than we are. They also have significantly less reserves than we have to fall back on. So it is a very difficult position across the sector as a whole, and you will see more and more reports in the news around councils believing they will shortly be approaching Section 114, which is bankruptcy from a local authority perspective. A few are already in that position. More and more are reporting that they are fearful of getting there. Broughton Forest is not anywhere near a Section 114 bankruptcy position, but we are facing an unprecedented level of financial challenge this year.
Councillor Barnard.
Thank you very much. It's following on the financial question. So reference was made at the head of the meeting about the emerging council plan. I mean, clearly, if the financial position of the council is challenging to deliver the services it has at this time, how is this whole process going to work now? Because quite clearly, you can't have a council plan which seeks to spend money that you haven't actually got now or won't have in the future. So I'm just wondering, in the context of the discussions we've had so far, what further work we might need to do as a commission and others might need to do in regards to the council plan to ensure that we can meet our obligations, because clearly this is a hugely worrying position. And, you know, as we monitor and look at what is going forward in terms of the plan, how that's going to impact on this, because this position is significantly worse than was being reported at the start of the summer, you know, when we were having that initial conversation about the contents and the priorities in the new council plan. So I'm just wondering how that plays out and whether this actually adds another level of conversation or discussion to this in the run-up to decisions being made.
And that's a fair point, Councillor Barnard. Chair, we have recognised that we do need to link the development of the council plan and service plans with our financial plans. So it's very clear that we cannot set an overly ambitious council plan that does not reflect our financial realities. So for that reason, then the council plan is intended to be brought forward for consideration by members in November, which coincides with the autumn budget process. So we intend that there will be an alignment. But Councillor Barnard is right that there may well be some quite difficult choices to make as part of that process.
Councillor Eggleston.
I'd just like to ask a question, please, regarding points L391 and 392. When I was having a look through, obviously it was what could we possibly do to decrease spending without it actually costing us anything. On there, it really doesn't give us any information on agency staff. So my question would be, please, could we have a breakdown of the number of agency staff and what sort of roles they're taking? How long have the staff been in the roles and whether they've been offered a fixed term contract instead? And what sort of agency migration has been attempted? And while they've been in post, are the roles still advertised to get substantive members of staff in rather than keep spending extra money? And I know we're an enhanced rate area for staff, but obviously with agencies and some demands for some of the staff, especially PSS roles, we often offer enhanced rates, and how many of those that we could bring back and actually work at perhaps training some staff up in-house or using other staff that could still fit those roles. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe there was probably about 20 questions in there. I'll do my best to deal with it. Now, we can provide details of the individual roles, but clearly not this evening. That's not possible. But at headline level, we currently have 133 agency workers within Bratton Forest Council, and the cost of those is expected to be somewhere in the order of £7 million over the course of the year. So that gives a sense of the scale. The arrangements that we have is that most of the agency staff come through an agency called Matrix, which is our normal provider that we use for agency staff. The arrangements through Matrix is that any agency staff who's been in place for over 12 weeks can be transferred onto the council's books without any agency fee. So we have the ability to do it through the contract. The challenge that we have is that most agency staff have chosen to be agency staff because of particular reasons. That might be because they want the flexibility of the employment, or in some reasons that's because they can expect much enhanced rates over and above what they would typically get if they were on the council's payroll. So there are conversations which do regularly happen with managers, and over the past 6 months we have managed to transfer 7 staff from agency to permanent. It's not a lot, but that's more than we had managed in the 12 months prior to that, because we have had quite a focus on it. The reality is that we're in a challenging market, so we do try wherever we can to appoint permanent staff, because there are lots of advantages to having permanent staff, but where we can't manage to do that, there are a large number of posts where we have to have filled to fulfil our statutory duties, so therefore we need to go to the agency market, and typically we do end up paying higher rates than the Bratton Forest rate, which does include, as you say, an out of London waiting. That is a reflection of the market. Again, it's a situation that is faced by all of our neighbours, and we're all struggling for the same pool of staff is the reality. So it's a staff market at this moment in time rather than one that we're much in control of. In terms of some of the further detail, so the types of posts that we typically are struggling with are social workers, both children's and adults, occupational therapists, approved mental health practitioners, planners, educational psychologists, SEND officers, procurement officers, lawyers, a whole range of staff across lots and lots of service areas. I think I'd add probably engineers and surveyors to that as well, which aren't on the list. So we are looking at a number of different approaches to that. It's proposed that we include retention and recruitment as part of our new business change programme. So that's being scoped out at the moment. But the kind of approaches that we're currently taking is to push harder on apprentices. We have 4 apprentices in the Resources Directorate who have been brought in specifically to help us mitigate the issue of not being able to recruit permanent staff and thinking ahead to future staff retention. We have a grow your own scheme. We have career graded posts in some services. We do have the ability to implement market supplements which help us bridge the gap between the agency rate and what our core pay rate is. So we do use that, but it does typically require a lot of market testing because we want to make sure that we're paying an appropriate rate relative to other authorities rather than over the top. But that is a tool. We've also introduced things like retention payments and golden hellos have been used in some areas. So social workers, I think, in children's services receive an annual retention payment. That's part of the way in which we manage to recruit more permanent staff. We're also very active at careers events, both locally and nationally. So our HR OD team, supported by service managers, do go out with the borough a lot, and they do regularly attend schools' careers events. So we've got a huge number of processes in place to try and resolve the issue, but it is a big one. It is systemic, and it's going to take us a while, I think.
Thank you. I just wanted to also sort of ask, obviously with agency rates, part of the agency rate, the member of staff doesn't receive that because obviously you're paying. So would it not be a consideration that you could possibly pay that person what they do receive, but cut out the agency? So at least each person, then you're saving at least £3 per hour on as a minimum, if it's for a fixed term.
Yeah, for a fixed term, we do have a bit more flexibility. For permanent staff, that's really difficult because we would break our pay grades and cause equal pay challenges potentially. But yes, we do that for fixed term staff quite regularly.
Thank you.
Can I just remind councillors to direct questions through me? Sorry. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you. One of the key areas that the Executive Directorate highlighted was agency staff and costs and demand in services, adults and children's services. Something, Chair, I'd be interested in hearing is, are we doing all that we can to support, what I call the early intervention and prevention? I know we're going to go into a challenging budget round, but are we maintaining and doing all we can to try and stop, for example, children going on to child protection plans into care? Would be one thing I think, as a commission we should really be thinking about. And the other part of that as well is, I know that, in a sense quite rightly, because it's public money, the government is taking a very keen interest in spending SEND, and that's an area where typically, we are outspending the resource that we get in. In this very challenging financial situation, are we able to, I'm trying to look both at the chair and at the, no disrespect to you, are we looking at all we can to try and make sure that, notwithstanding the financial positions we're in, that we have the capacity to address both these challenges? Because I've seen this in other councils. If a very short-term view is taken, actually the problems just escalate and rocket. And in Bracknell Forest, we've not had that situation because we've actually managed to maintain and manage the number of children in care and on child protection plans to an extent that it's not overloaded the services. So just interested how we're going to feed this in as well, because the data would suggest that we are in quite a challenging situation, because I know housing can impact on that as well. So apologies, Chair, I'm trying to look at you and try not to not look at Stuart. So I don't know if that's helpful. Thank you.
If I can come in, Chair, on the S&D point first, that we have struggled to recruit some staff, but following the approval of the executive of some extra funding for that. I'm pleased to say at this moment in time we do have a fully staffed SEND service. It is a mixture of permanent and agency staff, but we do have the number of people that we were looking to have. I want to chair, though, if I may ask Gráinne Siggins, the Executive Director, for people to come in on Councillor Barnard's first question around the early intervention.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, yeah, wonderful, thank you. So Gráinne Siggins, Exec Director for People Services, and thank you for your question, Councillor Barnard. The current level investment and focus ensuring that we have a fully staffed early help and support service continues, in addition to additional training for those early help staff to make sure that they're able to support and manage those complex situations within families. And that includes an additional focus on welfare support and hardship in terms of some of those interventions to ensure that the appropriate level of support is available to those families. As you're aware, we have the Children's Review nationally, which the government will be providing its response to soon, in terms of what that more blended offer needs to look like. Sorry, I haven't got my camera on. That blended offer needs to look like in terms of more comprehensive wraparound for children at the earliest point, and then bringing in social work capacity and social work support as those needs increase. But we haven't looked at the design of that service yet, but it's something that we will be progressing going forward about that more joined up offer in line with national statute.
I have another question. On page 8 of the report 16 of the agenda, listed as an emerging issue is the waste PFI contract. Could we get, or certainly for new councillors, get more of background on the waste PFI contract, please?
Chair, if I could bring in Damien James at this point, he is the expert on the waste PFI contract.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, for the question. So the waste PFI contract is a shared service that we have for waste disposal with two other councils. So it's ourselves, Reading and Wokingham Council. It was let in 2006 and runs to 2031. And the contractor is actually a company called FCC Environment, and they run the waste disposal service on behalf of residents of the three boroughs. Essentially what they're doing is disposing of all the waste that is collected at curbside through our own contractor Suez, and also they manage and run the household waste disposal sites at Longshot Lane, which Bracknell residents may be familiar with, and Smallmead, which is the Reading equivalent. And they're contracted to dispose of all of the different types of waste that are deposited at those locations, and they do that through a PFI contract, which was a 25-year contract. So one of the things that we did with the previous administration around about this time last year was do a member briefing session on the PFI contract, because it's a big area of spend. And I'm just wondering, that may help in terms of answer some more general questions around the PFI, what it deals with, the values, how it works, and that kind of thing, and be more than happy to offer that kind of briefing specifically on the waste PFI, if that would be of interest to members.
Be of interest to me. Yes, thank you. Any more questions in the room before we go online? Councillor Haverty.
Okay, in section 5 or action 5.6.10 of the report on page 29, it shows that the procurement review has stalled. I was just wondering what the situation with that is at the moment, and what the planned timescales are for picking that up and moving on with it. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, that's the 5.6.10. Is that correct? Yeah. So the corporate procurement team sits in the resources directorate. It is a small team of 4 people and has had 2 people in it for a large part of the last 9 months. So therefore, resources have been limited, and therefore the focus of the team has been supporting some of the big procurements that we have been undertaken as a council over that period. However, it is in the resources service plan to have a greater focus on social value in particular, because that is a tool through which the council can achieve some softer benefits through the contracts that it has in place, potentially linking into climate change mitigations as well through some of the big contracts that we have. Equally, alternative funding routes such as green bonds are something which we have in our minds to explore, because we suspect that's something that members may well be interested in. It's just been a matter of capacity not getting around to that. But we have now managed to recruit one extra procurement officer and are in the process of trying to recruit another one because one is retiring in December. So it's a little bit of flux. But we will get there, and it's all about really broadening the value that procurement can bring to the organisation, thinking how it can support wider initiatives like climate change and apprenticeships, etc. So it's moving in that wider strategic direction. So it's just a little bit delayed from where we hoped it might be due to capacity.
Councillor Forster.
Just following up on the same question, will we be following the Cabinet Office's recommendations on social value and sustainability in line with procurement, rather than creating something ourselves?
So our head of corporate procurement, who joined last December, one of his passions is around social value. So he's already identified that there are a number of different approaches. He did have a detailed conversation with the previous executive member for finance just before the election. He has had one initial conversation with the new executive member for finance since the election, presenting the broad options. But you're absolutely right, we would not start from scratch on an approach to social value. We would follow one of the national frameworks which is in place. But then within that, we need to develop as an organisation what were our specific priorities within the whole raft of the large menu that exists within the Cabinet Office's requirements. So it won't be something fundamentally new, but it will be tailored towards Brantford Forest's specific needs.
Any more questions in the room? Okay, we'll take questions online. Councillor Hayes, I can see you've got your hand up. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you for allowing me to speak, Chairman, and it's a pleasure to be able to attend the meeting. Having said that, it was just, first of all, before I ask the question, I would like to thank the question you asked with regards to, yes, the PFI. I would suggest that members do get with Damon James and officers on that, because this is a very important contract. But my question is on, and this is something I am very concerned about, is Strong's Heath. Here we have a situation where we are involved with 6 councils. There should be no reason why we are being held up so long, and I would ask the planning look at this and why are we being held, because this is an EV to climate change. Even ministers having visited it, and even our many councillors that have been there, and I would like others to see it, would be a benefit to our council extremely well. Could I ask why it's been held up so long through planning?
Chair, it's not an issue I'm particularly familiar with, so I'll look to colleagues online, so either Max Baker or Damien James may be able to address the question.
I can certainly help, Chair, if that's helpful.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Councillor Hayes is referring, I think, to section 5.02.03, which is around implementing the Strong Heath London Road facilities in line with the climate change strategy. It's on page 20 of the report, if that's helpful for members. So this is a long sort of developing plan that we've got to site a electric vehicle charging hub on a closed landfill site, which we're responsible for off the London Road. and we've been working for a number of years on options for that site to look at mitigating some of the costs that we have. It's a shared Berkshire site, so we share the costs between the 6 Berkshire authorities for managing that site in order to comply with the environmental permit that's on that site and applied by the Environment Agency. So we've been looking at ways to mitigate the costs of that permit and managing that site. And one of the ideas is to site an EV charging hub on that location. We have been now to planning twice with pre-application advice, and we've had the second set of pre-application advice back, and we are now progressing with a paper for corporate management team next month in September to start the process of next steps and where we're going to go in terms of next steps. Planning advice has thrown up some challenges which we'll need to get around, and we just need to have some advice from the corporate management team before we take next steps. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Any more questions online? No.
I need to say, Chairman, if possible, could we arrange that councillors be able to go to visit this site and see the benefits that could be gained for our council and in particular all our residents?
Yeah, thank you for that point, Councillor Hayes. So in order to open the debate, I will move the officer recommendation at 2.1 of the report. Vice Chair, will you second that?
Yes, Chair, I second that.
So before I invite commissioners to speak, I'd like to remind you that commissioners in the room will be invited to speak first. You'll be able to speak once and for no longer than 5 minutes. If you wish to propose a recommendation to the executive, the officer will keep note of each proposal and will vote on each one at the end of the debate. So we can go around the room one by one, or does anybody wish to speak first? Councillor Barnard.
Thank you very much, and can I thank Stuart for a very good report, and for all those officers who have spoken this evening. I think what's very clear to me is that as an executive and the administration and also us as a commission, that if we are going to work together to continue to deliver good services, we have to recognise we don't do this in isolation. And so I'm wondering if one of the focuses that we should have, and one of the things that we should support the executive in, maybe through the panels or this commission, is really drilling into whether our partners, and those key partners like health and others, are actually doing all they can in terms of the services they need to do to help support us. Because we don't do things in Bracknell Forest in isolation. And if you think about the areas we've been talking about this evening, if health isn't stepping up to the place, for example, looking at emotional wellbeing, mental health services, if we have issues, working with the police or others and things like this, around antisocial behaviour and things, we're not going to be able to deliver the objectives and the aims that we want to, and it will have a direct impact on our top line. It's the same way that, increasingly it's great to hear, the good work going on with schools in terms of managing SEN, in terms of our schools within the borough and things like this. So I'm wondering if that's a sort of a theme that we should pull out. We're facing these really big budget overspends. It is probably highly likely that our partner organisations are as well. But I think the one thing that we have is an element of democratic accountability here, where either through the panels of the Commission or actually working with executive members, we can call out when things are going well, but we can also highlight where we feel that our partners need to step up a little bit more to do this. The reason I say this is because I think it will work at 2 levels. One is a member level. It will ensure that those organisations know that we are taking a very key and a very visible interest in an objective way. Well, also, I would hope it would support our officers in those operational sort of day-to-day meetings that go on to say that these issues are really owned by Bracknell Forest councillors, both in terms of administration and scrutiny, and that then that will, over the next year, 18 months, 2 years or so, influence, the work programmes that we do to look into it. Because what does concern me overall is, and having had the privilege of working with a number of councillors, other councils over the last 20 years, when the financial position gets to this, the temptation is for people to withdraw, just to do what they consider to be their core activity. You then lose not just the social capital and social value you can generate by working together, but you also leave that joint working. The consequence of that is that the early intervention, the prevention, the ability to manage demand becomes harder. So I appreciate it's a more general point and principle, but I make it in the spirit of it being helpful in terms of how we can pull out individual things and then therefore seek, you know, the quarterly operations reports. I think, Adrian, following on from the RAG rating we're talking about, if any of those oranges and reds are not just because of things we can do, because no council plan will just be things that we can do, but they'll be dependent on a lot of other things, whether we need to actually drill into that so that those organisations, and indeed the same council, knows that we're looking closely at what's going on and we're here to help and support, but at the same time challenge, because if we don't do it, I worry what this will mean for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other recommendations you wish to make round the table? Councillor Hafferty.
Okay, new to this, so yeah. Certainly this, yeah, I guess it's similar to what Gareth was saying perhaps, but, sorry, Councillor Barnard was saying. Yeah, so section or action 1.1.2, spending is within the approved budget. I mean, that's the big issue. We really need to get on top of that. So I think we need to push and look into it and understand what's going on with it. I mean, budget is essentially underlies everything we do here, so it's quite important we look at that one. So I'd definitely like to go back and get more information about that and push that one. Similar to something that Councillor Eggleston mentioned previously about the actual recruitment that we have and the section that was the quarterly report, the section L392 and L391. They both indicate that we have issues and that we're using too much agency staff, and yet section 1.02 or 1.02.03 and 1.02.06 both have a green RAG rating, and actually saying that we actually have these new strategies in place for reviewing the workforce and deploying recruitment and retention. If that's the case, if that's green and that's good and we've actually got that now, how does that reflect on the fact that we're now using all this agency staff? I'd like to go back to check that, if we've got the new procedures in place, are they actually working? Are they going to change that? So going forward, will the quarterly reports in L932, 931, will they be reduced going forward, as you'd expect if those new actions have taken place? And that will do. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Welsh.
So I've just been looking at this really from my residents' point of view, what I believe they would want us to focus on or basically recommend. Obviously the spending, the 10102, the spending being within the approved budget for this year, we really need to make sure that that is looked at and as correct as it can be going forward for the next quarter. The next point I wanted to make was the 30804 develop send improvement plan. We need to look at making sure that's correct, making sure it's achievable, making sure it's affordable. So I think we should recommend that one as well. I also thought about the green development of our waste collection services, which is 50201, about the fact that we've only got 50% of the flats registered in the borough to have the food caddies. What we can do to improve that going forward to make sure we can roll the food caddies out to them. And also, everyone will know it's a big topic in the borough, to implement the parking base schemes, which was 50301. I think everyone can agree that's a really strong point that we need to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Anybody online who wants to make any points?
If I may speak, Chairman, Councillor Sherwood made it's Councillor Hayes. With regards to the flats, they've done extremely well, the team that we have working for us. our biggest problem, and there again, it's a learning issue, is that we are not the owners of the flats and such, and it would be appropriate again, like when we have classes, we'll call it, that one understands that it is management and agencies that can stop us, but our team are working very hard out there and do very well up to now what we have achieved.
Thank you very much. Well, I would certainly like to focus, as we have done, on the budget going forward. I think working from the 1.226 million figure, which now is considerably higher than that, it's encouraging that there's a directorate budget review set up, but that's something we should be certainly keeping a very close eye on, I think, as a group going forward, and certainly like to take views on how we might do that.
Chair, if I could just help in terms of the next steps and just in terms of the member debate. Officers obviously been taking a note of the areas that members have raised. I think I've heard two types of things that members have raised. One which is things that Overview and Scrutiny should be tracking as the next CPOR comes through, but also a number of areas that the Commission are recommending the Executive to focus on when they review the report. So I think as you move into voting on each of those items, these will be things that you'll want the Executive, when they review the report, to pay particular attention to.
Okay, so thank you. So we can now ask the officer to read out the proposals that have been put forward in turn, as just explained, and we can vote on those that are appropriate. Remember that only those in the room can vote, and please make sure your hand is clearly raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll read back to you what the recommendations. I think that I've got 7 that you've proposed. I might ask you just to clarify, because I think when it goes to executive, it might be useful if it's an actual question. So any clarification would be great. So the first one was, are all our partners doing all they can to support us to achieve our objectives? You also said there's a theme to pull out as we have an elected accountability. So I'm not quite sure how that would be phrased as a question to the executive to focus on.
If I can help on that, Chair, the way I would probably phrase that is to say that in reviewing, the performance of services, are our partners committing to the budgets that they should, in the form they should, to provide that support? So if I give you a direct example, if you take supporting, children and young people with additional, SEND additional needs and things like that, is health doing their bit? Are we doing our bit to ensure that actually they are they're receiving the service they want? Because, for example, some of the waiting times from health and things like that can be up to 2 years. So are there things that we need to be challenging and supporting the executive in challenging? That's just an example, but there are others where our partners might not actually be helping us do all we need to do. But also, I think it's really important that we also ask the executive to highlight examples where things are going really well. So we have that sort of balanced scorecard. But that's the aim. So the question is, are we getting the best we can from our partners to reduce demand and therefore reduce cost on our services given the overspend that we're facing? I'm sorry I'm not putting it very well, but I hope you get the general sentiment of what I'm trying to say.
And you note health. Are there other partners that you can specify that we think
you could have health, police, probation, voluntary, yes, schools, academies, voluntary sector. I mean, partners is all embracing. I tried not to use the word stakeholder, but I mean the issue there is, and I think Mike, you make a good point. It's that accountability from everyone that we work with, because we are facing overspends and we are facing financial challenges in areas where we can't do everything ourselves. And the only way we're going to do it is if these partners, and I think Mike, you make a good point about academies, for example, are part of that solution, particularly in terms of schools.
Chair, if I can help, I think in terms of a recommendation to the executive, because you'll be asking them to focus on an area of the report and ask questions of officers based on the area of the report. Perhaps if we just slim that down to something like the executive should ask officers to look at how we're working with partners to be able to alleviate our financial position.
Yeah, I think that would help. And if you wanted to use a specific example, it will tie into something that Councillor Welsh you mentioned as well, which would be around the whole SEND agenda as well. You know, the support through schools, because that brings schools health and everyone, and it's a good example. Berkshire Healthcare Trust and others with emotional wellbeing, mental health as well, where we can explore, you know, that full gamut of partnership working. So I think, thank you, Kevin. I think that really helps. I think clarify that. Thank you.
And Chair, what I will do through the Deputy Chief Executive is we'll make sure in the officer presentation at Executive we'll flesh out the detail that we've heard tonight, so it won't be just sitting with the raw facts of the question.
Lovely, thank you. I'll make sure you've got the rounder question as well as the direct question. So I'll just read it back to you so you know what it is. The Executive should ask officers to look at how we are working with partners in order to alleviate our financial position. And we can give an example of SEND if we need to. The second point you had was 1.1.2 is spending within the approved budget. Can we understand that and get more information? You've got that again as a fourth point. So you said spend being an approved budget needs to be as correct as it can be for next quarter. It's encouraging the directive budget review is being held, but we need to keep an eye on it. So I think we just need a question for the Executive about how you're going to ask them to keep an eye on the budget. Anyone want to phrase that?
I'm going to have another go. Although actually, given we do have a financial expert in the room, if I could ask the Deputy Chief Executive to take one of his hats off and put his other hat on, perhaps he could help us phrase that.
Yeah, but in getting there, I think what's important for members to understand is that there's already a plan to take a detailed report to the Executive in October, and I think that it would be sensible if the Commission was to have a look at that at its November meeting, so that you have a sense of what the current position is, so you're tracking progress against it, but that will also give a forward look to the 24-25 budget prospects, so that will give you an opportunity to have a look at the current year and future years. Perhaps the framing of the question is that the Commission wishes the Executive to keep a close eye on the current financial position and wish to support in that by undertaking a further review at its November meeting of the latest financial position at that point.
So I think from that our recommendation would be that idea comes back to the Executive at their next meeting. Oh, back here, sorry, yes, at their next meeting, at our next meeting.
Yeah, so just to sum up, the Commission requests the Executive to allow the to review the detailed plan, which is going to the October Executive by it coming to our November meeting. So that's 2 points you had. The third one was L391 and L392 indicated issues with too much agency staff, which appears to conflict with 1.2.3 and 1.2.6, which have a green RAG rating, highlighting new strategies in place to review workforce and recruitment tension are working. Will the QSRs be reduced going forward in L391 and L392 if this is the case? Yes.
Chair, I think I've got more of a speaking role than I imagined. I think that a recommendation could be to the Executive that they look at the RAG rating versus the narrative around agency to see if there is an inconsistency and what is the right approach that we should be taking.
Chairman, if I can come in, partly as a kind of response to the factual bit of it, but then with a suggestion. I think that the key point that I think everyone agrees in is that our objective is to reduce spend on agency, and the Commission wants to keep an eye on it, and probably would like the Executive to track closely the spending position on agency staff with a view to reducing. and that the effectiveness of the strategies which are being put in place are closely monitored to that effect.
Yeah, that sounds sensible.
Sorry, just type in your words, Stuart, thank you. If everyone's happy with that. Do you want me to read that back? Yep. Okay, so the third one you'll have is the objective is to reduce the spend on agency staff, and the Commission would like to keep a close eye on it and would like the Executive to keep an eye on it with an aim to reduce it and closely monitoring that.
And closely monitor the effectiveness of the strategies that have been adopted to address this. Because I think that addresses the point about is there a potential mismatch between the two.
Councillor Barnard.
Can I just ask, it's a difficult one because I should say first that there are very good agency people out there that come and commit significantly, but I think we also need to have an idea about the quality versus quantity as well, because for example in social work and things like that, and we know from SEND, I mean it's out there, it's in the Ofsted report into SEND, that inconsistent support, which was led in no part, small measure by you know, staff that weren't right at the time. So I think, you know, taking the agency point, I think it's a quality and quantity and what that actually means. You know, for example, in children's social care, continuity of social worker is important. That's generally not supported well by agency staff, but some other functions might be. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's the overall, you know, spend and quality of what we get back is what's important. And the quality is really important because that so often is where issues arise. Now, that's not to denigrate agency staff, please, as this is a public minute. It's absolutely not to denigrate the quality of agency staff, but we also have to understand the commitment and the understanding when someone comes to work in that capacity in Bratton Forest.
Thank you.
I'm just, sorry, I was just going to say, how do you measure that, I suppose, the quality?
Well, you measure it by outcomes and effectiveness. So, for example, if you have an agency worker maybe doing EHCP plans, and it turns out that the planning process is delayed, there are issues and concerns and problems with the outcome and the output, that you could argue, as historically was the case, that isn't great. Or it could be, or the number of complaints, or something like that, or, you know, or as a consequence of work, has that gone to the Ombudsman, or how long do people stay here, what are we doing? Because we do pay a premium, and in return for a premium, I think we should expect to have, you know, good people working for us.
So would you like to add to that, Chair, something about quality?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah,
Quality. Okay. Thank you. So that was the third one. The fourth one is 3.08.04. Develop send improvement plan. Make sure it is correct, achievable and affordable. Someone like to rephrase that?
I think it should be to deliver the plan, and also I'm not quite sure whether this is in large-scale public parlance, yes, but have due regard for the safety valve mechanism which we're part of, because I think this is going to be driven very much by a financial thing. So the plan is there, you know, it's the agreed plan in a statement that we had to put forward after the inspection. So for me, it would be delivering that. And it ties in with everything we've spoken about already. It ties in with working with partners, it ties in with agency staff, it ties in with all those deliverables. So, you know, again, I'm wondering if that's a very specific outcome, because, you know, is it, you know, how many of the plans are coming in 20 weeks if it's an EHC plan? How many children are not having plans that previously would have had plans because they can be supported in schools? It's a hugely wide issue. So, I would ask that maybe we ask Councillor Bailey if there are some specific metrics that we need to follow in that, you know, these sort of KPIs that will tell us whether that service is going. Because I'll give you one example, Chair. The performance of the service will get worse before it gets better, because as you actually catch up with historical plans that have gone over the 20-week timescale, and when they're completed, there'll be more than 20 weeks. So your number of plans completed as a percentage in 20 weeks will get worse before it gets better. So what we might want to know is, are we doing good professional timely work to ensure that we reach a planned conclusion in the 20 weeks that we have? are we actually clearing the backlog of however many cases it is that have been overhung? But I would also argue critically, given that the safety valve mechanism, which I'm sure we're going to be told about in weeks and months ahead, are we doing enough with our schools? And Mike, you made a good point about academies earlier, to make sure that we're picking up the additional needs as much as we can within our schools to avoid those costly placements, which puts a strain on that in-year SEND budget. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but we might need some guidance on what the best metric for that is. But I could be around plans and plan diversion, a bit like children's social care, you know, the number of children that are in care in child protection plans and not, and how you're actually pushing more to lower levels of intervention. I'm not sure, Chair.
Kevin, good.
Chair, if I could just help members somewhat. So what we're, as a commission, asking through this process is the executive will see the same report that you have seen, and you'll be saying to the executive, within the raft of all of the indicators, this would be an indicator that they should look at and ask further questions on, rather than developing new policy or new information. So in effect, you're just simply saying on that item around SEND, you've raised that that's an important area and it's something that they should focus on in their questioning of officers. So that context, I think, will be as part of every time this commission looks at SEND and looks at the CPOR. But it's really just coming back to executive, please focus on this area and ask further questions as the commission are interested in this area, or we think this is an area that is particular focus to the organisation.
Kevin, can we ask them, though, to come back to us with some pointers around the particular indicators they think we need to be exploring further to help with this, because it is a moving feast. And you know, there's a raft of information in that, and I think it's quite hard sometimes to pick out that which will help us in challenging back to understand whether this service is one that's moving in the right direction.
So, Chair, the process is really that with the Commission seeing a draft version of a report that the executive will look at, ask questions of officers, and then come to a conclusion in terms of, are we on the right track or on the wrong track. So you get the opportunity each time to see the draft and say, having looked at that, I'm a bit concerned about that data, or that feels like an area of interest, or, as you've done tonight, ask questions about something, being assured by the answers from the officers, and then said, okay, I think that data's fine. So that sort of widening the scope of what's not on the page, but to go to other areas, is sort of beyond the scope of what will be the report that officers will make. So, in effect, the Deputy Chief Exec or Chief Exec will present exactly what they presented to you tonight, but the executive would have the benefit of knowing the areas that you've looked at and said, with additional eyes, these things I think you should look at and ask further questions of. So that's what the exercise is tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, I think that's clarified that. So just to say back, that Commission believes that SEND is an important area, and that the executive should focus on that as part of their question of officers. The fifth one you had was 5.02.01. How could the number of flats currently registered for food caddies be improved? I've slightly rephrased that, but I think that's fine in itself. And the sixth one you had was about 5.03.01 about implementing parking bays. Again, if we rephrase it as we have the others, the executive, could the executive focus on implementing parking bays under 5.03.01? Unless there's anything else you want to clarify on that one. Okay. That was it, Chair.
So we're going to go through one by one and then vote on them.
Yep. Okay. So recommendation 1. In reviewing the performance of services, are our partners committing to the budget in the form they should? So I think we came out with, sorry, I've rephrased it several times. The executive to ask officers to look at how we are working with partners in order to alleviate our financial position. Yep. Is everyone in favour of that motion? Raise your hand. Lovely, thank you. Recommendation 2. The Commission requests the Executive to allow the Overview and Scrutiny Commission to review the detailed plan of the budget review and for it to come back to our November, well, it will come back to our November meeting. We don't need to request the Executive for that. So the Commission to request the Executive to allow the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, the Executive to allow the Overview and Scrutiny Commission to review the detailed plan for the budget review. Is everyone in agreement with that one? Thank you. Third one. Sorry, bear with me. In relation to L391 and L392, there was an indication of too much agency staff which conflicted with 1.02 and 03 and 1.02.06. Will the QSR be reduced going forward in L391 and L392 if this is the case? Yep. Okay, thank you. 4. The Executive to encourage the Directorate budget review and to keep an eye on... Oh, sorry, that was the budget again, wasn't it? Number 4. Sorry, bear with me. Number 4. The Commission believes SEND is an important area and requests the Executive focus on it as part of their questioning for officers. Everyone in favour of that one? Thank you. Number 5, how could the number of flats currently registered for food calories be improved? Yep. Number 6, the Executive to focus on implementing the number of parking bays under 5.03.01. That's the 6 priorities.
So they're all carried. The recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Commission will now form part of the report that the Executive will consider at its next meeting. We have an important voice in ensuring that the performance of the Council is thoroughly reviewed, and I thank the Commissioners here for diligently undertaking this essential role. Thank you everyone for attending, and I now declare this meeting closed.